Hi, everybody. My name is Zenka Caro, and I'm here with Alan Steinfeld of New Realities. And we're really excited because we're going to be here with Garry Nolan for the Unlimited show.
That's right, Zinka. Thank you for setting up this incredible interview. Garry Nolan is one of the insiders. He probably is deeper into the UAP disclosure than most people, not than anyone, but I couldn't help asking him for the first question about this whole theme that has just recently emerged with Jacob Barber called psionics, which is the ability to do more than just CE5, but call in these UAP craft with your mind. This is a whole new technology that's just being developed, and we're going to do that, Zinka.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we always hear that crafts are consciousness made. They're driven by consciousness. So somehow they interact with the consciousness of the driver, the person doing it. So, I really loved in this interview that Garry Nolan, as grounded as he is, 300 papers, saying, bringing the entire community together, go like, let's use rigorous science now, and getting really the community together. And really, I think that consciousness cannot be not part of the conversation. It's a very messy topic. It really throws a lot of the things that we think about in the material science, material world, but it has to be considered. And I'm glad he's on it. I'm glad he's on the brainwave. We were talking before we started about how channeling, you were saying Daryl goes in 8 hertz.
Darryl Anka, who's channeling an extraterrestrial, is using gamma wave frequencies when he goes into this trance, and that's what comes through. And maybe a sort of combination alpha and gamma, as Dr. James Hart there in Sedona has demonstrated. You can have multiple higher frequencies of brain waves. I think that's part of the psionic assets that Garry Nolan will refer to in this video, along with other things. Yeah.
Yes, and we're going to talk more about this right after the broadcast. This broadcast was recorded 2 days ago. And by the way, Jim Hart has discovered also that if you're right and you're left, its position of the brain and it's how balanced, you can see the other side when you have these upper nodes in balance. So it's incredible, but we're going to play the interview.
We are. I just want to say, before we talked a little bit about the telepathy tapes and how we're in a revolution of consciousness. There's whole new areas of what this thing we call consciousness really means, how to operate, how to understand how ETs actually think, which is where we're really going with all this, and coming to an equal level. So the disclosure is nothing more than being ourselves in a way. So I'm excited about it all.
Yes, Adam always says that he wants to study the consciousness of ETs, not their crafts, not their so yes, definitely. And we'll talk more about the telepathy tapes as well, because we've featured Susie Miller this week. So here we go, guys. We'll see you in a little bit. This is an incredible interview. Thank you, Garry Nolan, for everything you've done for science, disclosure, cancer, and everything else. Here we go.
Thank you, Zenka, for making it possible. Okay, let's go to the video.
Okay.
Can one experience change your life? We believe the unlimited potential of consciousness has been untaught and untapped. Together, we can change that. The LightNet community was born as a citizen science discovery lab. Can our collective curiosity help us see the world in a whole new light?
Hi, everybody. My name is Zenka Caro. I'm from LightNet. I'm here with Garry Nolan and Alan Steinfeld of New Realities. And we are going to be interviewing Garry for this episode of the Unlimited show. Now, Garry doesn't need an introduction. He is one of those people. He's written 300 scientific papers, immunology in Stanford, among things. Now, he is focused on the Soul Foundation now and his growing curiosity in UAPs and beyond. Alan, Garry, welcome today.
Yeah, I want to say Garry probably is one of the most important voices in the coming disclosure or the ongoing disclosure of the Soul Foundation. Plays a very important part. and Maddie's one of the co-founders of that. And as an immunologist at Stanford University, he's used to facts. He's not, he likes to confirm what happens or what the aspects of this phenomena is really all about. And I appreciate all the work you've done the last few years to bring out the truth, Garry. And recently, we've heard the term psionics, and that is a huge game changer for those looking into this phenomena and those trying to find psionics and the importance of that activity.
Sure. Well, I think the way that you start talking about psionics is by going back to so-called experiencers and the basically the stories and anecdotes from people literally over decades, and frankly, if you look at it the right way, centuries, of how people claim some kind of mental interaction with entities, whatever you want to call them. Now, I'm not validating that those interactions are real. I'm taking the John Mack approach of saying these people have a story and they have an experience they had, which is why they're called experiencers, and they framed it as an interaction with an entity. Now, the notion of where psionics has showed up, frankly, has been around since the whole CE5 trials or experiments that were done, where there were claimed manners by which there could be a calling of some kind of object, and it would show up for certain people, not necessarily at a whim, but with a sufficiently high likelihood that the recipients and the participants in the activity would say, hey, I have this ability to do so. So the claim is, and again, I'm not validating that it's real. The claim is that the military or the government has known about this for decades, and it's one of the manners by which interaction occurs. And that one can basically say, hey, it's time to show up. We want to see you. We want to talk to you. We want you to show us that you're real. Now, I was there when such an event was run, and something showed up at the time of the guy who was doing it, his claimed call. Now, it was just a few frames in a video of something moving apparently very fast across the scene and then coming back. And so it's a correlation, it's not a causation necessarily. I found that interesting. Now, I think the next, because this does, I think, concern a lot of, let's call it lay people or scientists, is it sounds like pseudoscience. But my challenge to those scientists is not to explain it away as pseudoscience, but to say, okay, let's say that it did happen. If it did happen, how could it happen? And how do we use the physics of today to perhaps explain and understand how that operates? Now, interestingly, in the last few days, I was at my mentor's house here on Stanford campus. She's 90 years old. She and her husband were my co-mentors. And there was at the dinner somebody who I'd known since then, since graduate school, who was the computer programmer for the lab, but was also a brilliant physicist. And we were talking about quantum entanglement and his theories about how things operate. And without going into all the gory details of his approach to understanding entanglement, there's many ways that you can structure a standard model of physics or a model of physics where points in 3D space are actually closer to each other or interacting with each other in ways that allow apparent information transfer across space and time that don't require some intermediate transmission of electromagnetic waves. You know, our brains sit in a quantum foam of space-time. We are just organized space-time. So we interact with each other via quantum fields. So to say that there might be other ways that quantum objects can interact with other things in a way doesn't surprise me. I mean, at the Soul meeting, I challenged the audience to say, okay, given everything that, you know, is more or less claimed and we can think of as possibly real, what kind of technology and background physics would you need to postulate to explain or allow for this to happen? Because that's where creativity and you know, frankly, discovery happens. So I don't have a problem thinking or that there's a way for a technology to know that they're being thought about in some manner. I don't know how it would be done, but I don't have a problem saying, okay, well, maybe. And if, because once you say, maybe, the next question is, how? And that is, you know, that's the engine of creativity in science to me. So I hope that.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, you know, speaking of creativity and science and applying our scientific minds like you have been doing and advocating for the nation and the world, when we look at these mysteries, right? So now we're moving into a new presidency. They've stated they're going to be disclosing everything. They're reviewing budgets and disclosing everything from JFK to MLK to the orbs and everything in between. How does this impact Soul Foundation? How does this impact your dreams and hopes for next year? Tell us about the foundation and how you are excited about applying the scientific community and the governmental funding and to our future.
I think the Soul Foundation grew out of frustration in a way that, you know, I saw first on Twitter, if you will, I don't know, 5-7 years ago. And I said, look, if you guys don't get professional about this, no scientist is ever going to take you seriously. And if you don't frame your postulates as hypotheses, and if you don't stop calling them conclusions, then people aren't going to ridicule you, or people aren't going to continue to ridicule you. So it's like, and that made me realize that, you know, there needed to be a formalization of it, first of all, which I, you know, campaigned about over several years about how to talk the science. But then there needed to be an organization which could bring scientists together and create a perimeter within which the science could be reasonably discussed, even if it's just, you know, an explorer's club for fun of let's just all sit around and have a beer. But what I found happened, having set that up and done so with the right balance of individuals, so, you know, Peter Skafish, David Grush, myself, you know, that brought in the kind of high level expertise and formalities. I mean, Peter more in the philosophy and anthropology area than I was, because that's at least half, if not more, of the problem. And David as the person with the sort of who kick-started, along with Lou and Jay, who's kind of a hidden, or was a more hidden figure until recently. The discussion, again, in a formal way, that Dave and Jay and Lou said, we have the data, or the data exists. And so I'm there to say, okay, well, let's structure the data in a way that other scientists can talk about it. And here's what you need to do. You need to write papers. You need to do the boring part of getting peer review. because then it's referenceable and then it becomes a foundation for more studies and something that is you can point back to and say, hey, look, this has already been done and proven. You don't have to redo it. And that's how science operates. And then, of course, Peter's there to take on the more social aspects of what it means for humanity in a bigger way. And so, I'm beyond thrilled, frankly, as to where we are with it. I never expected it to succeed as much as it has. But I think that the success is not because of us. It's because of the burning need of what was required and what everybody knew was required. And once they saw that it was there, they're like, that's it, let's follow them. And what came of it was even better. It, in a way, helped instantiate many other groups. And so now there's a cottage industry of groups, each of which has their own niche and their goals. There's a scientific coalition of UAP research, which brings together groups of whole groups of scientists to organize around it. There's John Priestland's group, Unhidden, which is about the psychological aspects. There's the John Mack Institute for Experiencers. There's Ryan Graves for the flight issues with both military and commercial pilots. And then there's UAPDF, the UAP Disclosure Fund, which at least was the initial discussions were around helping whistleblowers legally, but became more a policy institute for working directly with the government. And the whole idea is to create an ecosystem that both commercial entities as well as the government and society can turn to and say that at least there's some experts or some people with professional background that are able to address it. And one of my big interests and part of my goal at Sol is not just to be an academic. I mean, one of the things that I did at Stanford back in the day, and I got a fair amount of flack from as an assistant professor, was saying, hey, look, ideas can become companies and the government doesn't need to fund everything. The government funds the discovery of ideas in an unbiased way. And then you then have the venture community or investment community there to pick up the slack and take it and turn it into commercialization. And so I have been, for the last 5 or 6 years, beating that drum that if any of this is real, the commercial opportunities are extraordinary. The technology represents not just a leap of understanding, it represents hundreds of technology revolutions, any one of which could frankly change the face of the planet, hopefully in a good way. But just look what a grain of silicon did. A grain of impure silicon or impure germanium is the heart of everything we do today in electronics. So, there are certainly understandings of the universe that need to be appreciated if somebody else has already appreciated them. And even if they're not willing to give us the ideas directly, if we can learn from just observing what they do, we say, okay, well, now that we know that's possible, how can we do what we now know is possible? So, that's really what Sol is meant to be. It's meant to be the same A to Z, play with ideas and turn them into value that I've participated in and driven for my whole career. And frankly, I didn't come up with that model. I learned it from my mentors, Len and Lee Herzenberg, and then watching David Baltimore, my other mentor then at MIT for my postdoc, and then at the people around them who were so successful. and say, okay, well, how are they successful? I see what they did, or I see aspects I think I understand, and let me try to replicate it and bring my flavor to it.
Thanks, Gary, for that. I want to just go back to some of these organizations like Skywatchers. I want to know how much is your involvement with that and Soul? And I'm going to throw out a few more questions. Have you been able to qualify some of these Skywatchers through your brain analysis? And is there also a way to enhance that cataputainen aspect of the brain by and increase the efforts of that? So that's a bunch of questions. Answer what you want.
So, Skywatcher is an organization that I've been with since its beginning. I don't speak for them. They've been speaking for themselves quite a bit lately, and I'll let them, the formal, the officials of that talk about the goals of Skywatcher. But when I participated in the first event, I was really just there as a neutral observer, first to make sure that nobody jumped to conclusions on things, but also just to, provide a scientific framing for how the questions are asked. And it's not that the people who were there are in any way naive or stupid. It's just that the majority of them had military backgrounds and were involved in so-called retrievals of prosaic material and then others. But they, in the course of their careers, had met and or seen things that were sufficiently anomalous that they had those kinds of aha moments that said, okay, well, since nobody's going to be doing this from a governmentally but public-facing posture, well, there's no reason we can't do it. There's enough information out there already that we don't have to bring things that we know about how to do on the inside to the outside, because we can basically point to public approaches and use what's already free on the internet to approach this, and including things like, as you first asked at the top of the hour, psionics, at least the claim of it. The question you ask about, can you enhance? That is part of a discussion in the group, and I won't talk for other people who could talk it better than me. But it was from the very beginning, in my mind, once you localize a function in the caudate putamen that might be involved in the processing of information, if not the actual, let's say, antenna. I don't think the caudate putamen is the antenna. I think it's a processing function, and that the information is somehow, if it's real, impinged across the brain, and then it's coordinated in the caudate putamen, and that's actually what caudate putamen does with senses. It takes all your senses, incorporates them into a structure downstream of executive function that says, this is what I need to do. And then unconscious functions that say, react to that flash of light, or react to that leopard about to leap out of the bushes at me, in a subconscious way, processes it and says, here are the movements and things that you need to do relative to your emotional and memory state. That's for real. That's what the caudate putamen is involved with in what we call intuition. But as I was thinking about it, it became kind of obvious to me that if you needed to place a coordination of the information that might come as an additional sense, or a sense that we don't understand, it was still going to have to go through the same routing system. There's no need to evolve a whole new system if you've already got one in place onto which you can overlay the same kind of information. So that obviously, you just need to be paying attention to even lay literature that there are ways that you can stimulate the brain from the outside, whether that's via drugs, that change the nature of how nerve pulses operate. Things as drastic as DMT and LSD and the whole tryptamine family and beyond, to electromagnetic transcranial stimulation that's been around for a couple of decades now, and now ultrasonic stimulation of the brain in ways that don't fry the brain, but yet turn on or off various regions, and it's now known that you can do that. So it's an obvious next step to say, okay, well, if this part of the brain is involved in, let's say, claimed remote viewing or claimed psionic interaction with entities from beyond, why don't we try stimulating it and see if it gets any better or worse? But here's the problem. People might do that in their garage, and God knows what that does to people, right? You don't want to be messing around with your brain. You don't want to be the guinea pig. So again, stepping back and doing this in a formally scientific way, first of all, looking at the ethics of what you're doing, getting institutional review board approvals, which is the standard way that clinical trials are ever done on humans, where you basically say to a board of experts, ethics and whatever the relevant science is, say, how do you do this? Or this is our proposal. Do you see any holes in it? Do you see where we might get in trouble doing this? Like, for instance, you don't do it on children, as even with parental consent, because consent really means you understand. Consent doesn't mean that somebody let you do it. So you really have to understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you put it together in a way that the time and money and effort spent doing it is not wasted, so that you try to fill all the potential loopholes ahead of time and the mistakes you could have made, so that you don't waste anybody's time in the process of carrying it out. So yeah, I mean, and again, I now know of many groups trying this, and it's not just the people that I'm most immediately talking to, and that's exciting, again, because I think Sol and other people who've been moving this has created a permission structure that is, hey, it's okay to do this. It's okay to ask fringe questions. I mean, I want to reclaim the word fringe and turn it into something positive, not something that gets thrown at you by the New York Post as some sort of declaration of near insanity.
Garry Nolan is the man you call when there's no earthly explanation. And as you say, there's all this repressed curiosity that's coming out. And it's great that you're lending your scientific research mind to these questions and to these researchers that have questions, one of which is Sean doing the super experiencer. You can find out about this research, by the way, at exostudies.org/super experiencer. And Sean is going to be studying the brain of experiencers that have multiple experiences and looking. So as a biology, as we look to our biology and what we teach people when we bend spoons and everything else is consciousness as well. Because once you understand how consciousness works, it's hard to undo it. When I talked to Sean, I asked him, I said, do you think people are born with these abilities of remote viewing, bending spoons, all these things? Or is it something that they have after an ET contact, after an experience? Were they given that? Were they born with it? What are your feelings on our human capabilities and our future of having more capabilities as we become aware that we can, right, do these extraordinary things?
I mean, I think it's like playing the piano. Some people are just naturals at certain things. And I can play the piano, or I can sing, but you better cover your ears when I do either of those, because it's, you know, it's harsh. But when it comes to, you know, math or biology, intuition, you know, that's my strength. So I think you can teach people to do something, or to at least organize whatever capability or level that they have. I mean, I can be taught to play the piano, but I wasn't a Mozart at age 4. And so I think as well, just like with this, you know, people who are born with it. And many of these people later in life say that either I found I needed to suppress it, or I needed to ignore it, or I found a way to manage it. So that's the first part. Now, the second part of your question was about, you know, does the interaction cause it? I think all the interactions might do, unless somebody's reaching into your brain and restructuring how your brain operates, is reveal to you a way to accomplish it. It was always there, you just never realized you could do it. It's sort of like the muscle memory needed to be activated. And so once you realize that you can do it, it becomes easier to do it next time. So I think that for many people, when they have an interaction, there's 2 ways to think about it. One way, they have an interaction and that strengthens a mental connection approach that allows them to continue to do it. So just like with meditation, I mean, when I first began learning how to meditate, I couldn't do it, but now I can very quickly go into a state where I can clear my mind in, 5-10 seconds. I'm not a meditator. Like, I mean, I can't do it for more than like 10 minutes, but I can clear my mind because I've learned how to do it. So I think that's part of what is going on with some people. But I think for the people, though, who, for instance, there's many stories of individuals who've had some event occur, medical event, and they wake up after this event where now they have this ability, they have some new ability. And I think one way to explain that is a process of neurogenesis, that 2 parts of the brain might not have previously been connected, but after damage, oxygen insufficiency in the brain caused nerve damage. The brain does have, now we understand, the ability to regenerate partially, and that might sort of create a network around the damage that connects 2 areas of the brain in ways that they weren't before. Now, it doesn't happen in everybody just because you got had head trauma, but in the few people that were lucky enough, if you will, to have the damage in the right place, this connection occurs. Maybe, I'm just, again, I always am disappointed in scientists who say, oh, well, that just can't be. It's like, well, why don't you just play with the idea and see where it goes? You don't have to dismiss it dismissively.
Yeah, thank you for that. Bud Hopkins used to say, most scientists like to explain the uninvestigated instead of investigate the unexplained. And so I want to ask you, you've been very outward about your own personal experiences, as a paper boy when you were, I guess, 10, and then this experience in England. Hypothetically, perhaps, how much has that informed you and your passion for this subject, and maybe a little shift in your own physiology? Yeah.
I think without those, I wouldn't be here today, without having had those experiences, because as I've often said, there's the anecdote of your experience. An anecdote doesn't mean it's just a story. You experienced something and you know what happened. So you don't need anybody to tell you that, or you don't need to believe anybody who says that you're crazy. So I experienced those things, whether anybody else likes it or not. And so for me, it's not a belief, that was an experience for me. And so the little guys in my bedroom are perhaps in some ways less believable because it might have been a dream, except that it seemed to be a recurring dream over a few weeks. And the 20 years later, seeing a picture of what it was that I saw in my bedroom on the front cover of Whitley Strieber's book Communion was an ontologic shock for me, where I just dropped the book literally sitting in the used bookstore there. It's just here on California Avenue at an old used bookstore down there. But for me to translate that to other scientists, or for me to prove to other people that it was beyond just an anecdote, requires everything that I'm doing with the Soul Foundation. So, I had what might be thought of as an out-of-body experience, where I woke up and felt like I was in the middle of a star field. I was like, where the hell am I? Kind of looked around. I just sort of felt like my perception was like, where am I? Oh my God, where's home? There was one star that was brighter than all the others. And then I just felt myself sucked down back into my body, and I woke up. And it was one of the most I still remember it. I don't remember where it was, probably in my 30s or something. And so it's just, they could have been some kind of weird dream, but they stick with you. And then they reinforce the things that were real, which was the thing that was most real and can't be explained away as a dream state, was the event as I was a paperboy where the object went right over my head. So it's like, it's there. It's not provable except in my memory, but my memory is me. And so I don't need to believe something. I know that happened. So everything else is perhaps a confirmation of that. But again, looping back to what I said at the Soul Conference, is how then do I create a story, meaning a scientific story, of the technology or events or structure of the universe or the structure of whatever it is that's going on, that encompasses all of these experiences and the things and the experiences now of other people, because you can't just rely on your own experiences. So there's something very, very, very complex going on. Relating back to the question about consciousness is, even physicists are freaking out because they are beginning to understand that the universe doesn't happen unless consciousness observes it. And that's a very uncomfortable place for a physicist to be, at least until recently. I think we've reached a stage of science where what is explainable is reasonably well understood, but we're now at the fringe of what we understand. And the only way to explain the fringe is to come up with new science that goes beyond the simple ways that we understand it today.
The quantum world is banging at our door, ET's banging at our door, dimensionality, all of these new and exciting things. So if, considering we have a new world where we're not going to have to spend a lot of our time in the disclosure world of trying to say, hey, this is important, let's listen, is it real, is it not, right? So all that effort that we put in over the years, I am hopeful that things could change now. And in that, leaders like you, what are you, Garry Nolan, interested in, aside from everybody else? What lights you up? I know you're interested in crash retrieval at the conference, Soul Foundation conference. Hal was talking about programmable quantum materials. I was like, wow. But biology, DNA, ETs, crash retrievals, if you were given a sizable amount of budget with as much researchers as research teams as you wanted to direct yourself, what is your heart's desire to research right now?
It would be two things. One is materials understanding. Because again, if you want to reach other scientists and you want to reach the lay public, you want to be able to show that there is money for value or value for money put in. And so, again, if such technologies exist, I mean, I happen to think that they do based on everything that everybody I've spoken to and the way that people react in the government around this, that understanding that requires a Manhattan Project level study. And it needs to be done outside of the doors of the government. Whether the best place is academics or the best place is some sort of public-private relationship, but you want to do it in a sufficiently transparent way that people see that there's value and movement out of this. So there's the materials aspect, because that kind of gets into the programmable matter point that you just raised of that. I mean, I think what he means by programmable matter is, at the very least, the ability to rearrange the structure of material and the components of that material, which are not particles, they're some sort of weird vibration in space-time, or as other people I've been speaking to, some sort of geometric structure of space that explains quantum nature in a different way. And so if you had access to the behind the scenes puppet strings that are matter in some way, if you could reach behind this structure and then just change the relationship of those things, you could program it from behind. It's kind of like you've got a puzzle piece in front of you, and behind the scenes is a puppet master moving the pieces around to make something be what it is that they want it to be. Now, maybe that's done by consciousness. It was Jacques who first shocked me when he said, in talking about and explaining, as a way to explain all of the observations, like I was saying before, that we have on the table in front of us. His comment was, to them, reality is negotiable. And what he meant by that was by whim and by thought or consciousness or technology or consciousness interacting with technology that enables it, they can take a volume of space and make anything happen within it. Again, it's unimaginable levels of technology or unimaginable ways that it could happen, but it's the stuff of science fiction, and I mean that in a positive way. That, okay, if somebody's doing that, what do they understand about the universe that we don't? And so that excites me. So I'm 64, so I'm unlikely to see the end of this story, and I'd be happy if I'm only helped push it along. But I don't know. To me, that's at least part of it. The second part is consciousness, obviously, and so to your point of before of can we reach into the brain and change things? I think before we want to change things, we want to understand things. You don't want to be poking about in people's brains until you understand what you're doing. But if you're getting down to something like the Hameroff-Penrose or OR, orchestrated reduction approach, or whether there's something else that explains what consciousness is and how it sits in the fabric of space-time. I mean, whether you're a materialist and you think that consciousness is only an illusion of the neurons interacting with each other, there's still what Federico Fagan calls the qualia, and other people have called the qualia of how do you explain what red means and what taste of a hamburger is in terms of consciousness, and how do you encode that in neurons? And so understanding the relationship of how matter creates or allows for consciousness. I mean, it's already well understood now that the brain is not just those neurons. The electromagnetic frequencies that we know happen, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, theta waves, et cetera, are actually communicating from this side of my head to the other. I mean, there are resonance, and if anything, minimally, there's sort of clock, the CPU clock that keeps the brain, moving in a regularized manner. But we now understand that at that grander level, one side of the brain is talking to the other and keeping it in concert. But we also understand that cancer cells have their own little electromagnetic fields that are different than normal cells, and that you can actually perhaps even detect that as a diagnostic approach. And people are already thinking about using electromagnetic fields to specifically go after cancer cells in tissue. Now, having just had a cancer removed, like literally right there next to my eye, that would have been a far better thing than the giant hole they poked in me, and then they had to reconstruct it. People often say, what's wrong with Gary's face? Because I've had my face reconstructed like 4 times now. Not because I wanted to look prettier, but because I had to remove giant cancers that had, infested my face, because I'm just prone to them. So, I think that is, those are the two things, because if we can understand it at that level, maybe it can help explain schizophrenia. Maybe we can resonate the brain in a way that takes somebody who is otherwise disordered and resonate their brain back into a place where it's working right again. Or maybe we can resonate brains so that we can have an expanded awareness. I don't know. But those are the 2 areas that I would go after. And if I had the money, I mean, I get asked literally every other week to get myself involved with some of these mummies down in Nazca. I mean, I think there's maybe something there. I mean, there is science that's being done that still has me scratching my head and going, but I don't think it's being done right because the money's not, and I'm not dissing the people who are doing anything. It just needs a sufficiently large research program to oversee it, to get it done right. Like I did with the Atacama mummy. I mean, that took a lot of time and effort. Some people didn't like what I had to say about it. But, I think I've proven over the years that I'm not here to debunk. I'm just here to tell the data as it's seen. But I've had 4 decades now of working in the sciences, and I know how it should be done. And so to the extent that I can pass on that and create a rubric within which others can learn, that's great. I mean, I have like 8 or 10 of my former students are now professors at Stanford and Harvard and, many other places that I've taught them how to think, how to do science. I mean, they were naturally smart people, but I gave them a method. And so I think there's a method still to be provided to this whole fringe area. Again, I'm going to reclaim that word. This whole fringe area, there's a method to be applied that others can learn. And it's not hard. And I was taught it by my mentors. So, I both, the teachings, I went to Catholic school. So I said, and plus I'm Catholic. But all my mentors were Ashkenazi Jews, and they had a particular way of thinking about things that I realized there's a method there that I can learn. And so, hybridizing those things together I think has value. There's always, I know what the next question is going to be. There's always value in hybrid, right? There's hybrid vigor, where you take the best aspects of one thing and another, you bring them together and you create something new.
Right. Thank you for that. Just want to go back to the idea of experiencers and the fact that you saw these little beings and millions of other, or hundreds of thousands, have seen similar scenes. Doesn't prove it, but there's a correlation of evidence. But that's not the question I want to ask. I want to ask about something you've said earlier in your career. I think I heard a conversation with you and Carolyn Corey, where you hypothesized, maybe according to Moore's law, that the DNA is like 9 billion years old and the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. So is life an emergent property of creation? And does that life then constitute a form of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and interestingly, even somebody from SETI just the other day says said it's very likely that, aliens exist because, as many have said, there's billions and billions and billions of planets, even, in our local supercluster, that have conditions of life, conditions of environment that would allow even life like us to emerge. So the notion of 9 billion years versus 4 billion is that somebody, and it wasn't me, came up with a Moore's law of DNA complexity. So the Moore's law of transistors is that every 5 years, whatever the number is, the complexity goes up by twofold, and it's a line going up. Similarly, somebody thought, okay, well, the chromosomes and the gene networks are a circuit, way more complex than any computer we've ever made. They're a circuit, and similarly, you could imagine that there has been, from the beginning of time since today, a complexity. So what they did was they modeled the complexity of what it would look like going all the way back to, from where we are today. I mean, back to the Cambrian. I think it's the Cambrian explosion, if everybody knows what that is when sort of modules of genes came together in ways that created all these weird structures. And have you ever seen a picture of the supposed Precambrian or Cambrian sea? There'd be all these monstrous looking things from which only a few things ended up surviving. But the modularization and the ability to put things together like Lego blocks had come to fruition. But before that, there must have been others. So when they project that back in time, when they cross the x-axis of when time is, so complexity on the y-axis, x-axis is time, it crosses at 4 billion years. And that's weird, because the universe supposedly was created 9 billion years earlier than that, or at least what we understand the universe to be. So the universe has been around for 15 billion years. There was probably enough matter available for something to evolve probably within about 5 billion years. So there's a gap there of about 6 billion years. So you have to propose two things. Either life occurred elsewhere and just sort of hopped a rock and showed up here, and then just as a spore, and so it kind of jump started everywhere because of those initial conditions, or complexity went through an exponential very quickly at the beginning and then leveled off into a linear line. So those are the two possibilities. It either went like that, or it, from 4 billion years ago, or it happened much earlier. And so, and people say, well, how reasonable is that? Well, how reasonable is it that the metal in this pen actually is a condensate of supernovas that happened 10 billion years ago and turned into a cloud of atoms and then condensed and turned into a solar system sufficient that somebody was able to mine it. I mean, so the same process that created the metal in this thing is the process that you could imagine allows for, you know, some lucky microbe to make it from one place to another. So I have no problem with it. You know, it's a kind of diaspora. You know, and just look at some of the recent results with deep miners. You know, they're mining material from miles under the earth, and they pull up rocks that have microbes in them that their metabolism is so slow that they divide once every 100,000 years. Okay, well, maybe that was the first, you know, maybe that was the first microbe that hitched a ride. So, and that makes you go back and think again about, well, where did life evolve? People always think of life as having evolved on the surface, you know, in the intertidal zone, and lightning strikes, and boom, the molecules come together, and you know, life begins. Maybe life begins deep under the earth, or deep under an earth, or a place that would be inhospitable to us today. But it, you know, that, well, if you can imagine that, suddenly the place where life can start expands exponentially. It's anywhere there's water and heat and sufficient minerals. So that means life could happen everywhere, because there's lots of rocks, you know, that are big enough to have melted water and mineral availability. Now, here's another interesting thing. What is most life made of? Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, and a few of the other, and metals come along, and mostly metals are used in enzymes to help catalyze reactions. That's interesting, because the very first elements that ever got made in the first novas or supernovas, carbon, nitrogen, blah, 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 blah. The heavier atoms, uranium, et cetera, took stellar evolution of multiple supernovas. So we're the luckiest downstream owners of those heavy metals, like iron. But those weren't the first of the elements that were around. But life is almost exclusively made of the lighter elements that showed up in the earliest phases of the universe's expansion. So once again, it gives you the opportunity to have life beginning way earlier than it was required for metals to show up.
And it may be an emergent property of creation. Therefore, you're saying it's probably everywhere.
I can't imagine now. I mean, I had really a sort of a moment when I read that paper just about 3 weeks ago of, you know, these ultra long-lived microorganisms that live deep under the earth. It was like, geez, that means anywhere there was such conditions, which probably exist literally in every solar system that ever was. There's water and heat. And so therefore, the conditions for life are way beyond what we think of as a habitable planet.
Well, you've looked at brains, human brains. How different? I mean, I don't know if you've looked at alien brains, but if you haven't. But if their physiology and neurology is different, they would be able to perceive different levels of reality. Is that correct? Or different types?
But I mean, you know, what's the name of that scientist down at UC Irvine? I think is Hoffman, I think is his name. Is that, you know, you only, I mean, basically his postulate is you only perceive what is evolutionarily necessary for you to pass on your genes. It's no need for me to perceive you as an electromagnetic or a quantum wave function, right? I don't need to see cosmic rays with my eyes because it's not evolutionarily an advantage for me. So basically he's saying is that what we perceive as reality is only enough to allow me to recognize a mate, and have children, right? So, so that's the first thing. So the second thing is, and I was watching, I've been watching the TV show Shogun recently, a series on Hulu, I think, and about Japanese culture in the 1600s-ish, and how different they were to the Westerner, a British Westerner who shows up in their thinking style, and what they assumed about reality, or they assumed at least about cultural interactions. So, and you know, you don't have to go to Japan. You can go to any of the shamans or other cultures that their perception and rules of how the universe is are different. They still have the same senses, but they interpret them differently. You know, imagine that you were something that lived in a place which was dark. Well, you'd probably evolve an intelligence, if intelligence evolves, that might use sound, you know, and use sonar. And we have those on Earth. We have bats, right? We know that sharks and other fish in the ocean use electromagnetics to sense their surroundings. So, you know, what happens when you have an intelligence that uses something like that? And how does that change your structure of reality and the math, the basic assumptions you make? You know, again, I've been learning about in math, and this is again related to the conversation that I had with this old friend of mine, you know, about quaternions and Tonians, which are, you know, mathematical constructs of, you know, unreal numbers, but are necessary to explain that physicists use to explain reality and transformations in 3 and 4 and 8D space. And it's like, wow, imagine if you had a brain that instinctively understood that, right? I mean, would an avian species be more likely, because they think in 3D much more intuitively, to come up with ways of understanding math that might advance them further than us? Would it be possible for a reasonably intelligent group of dinosaurs to not require technology, but find a way to use their consciousness to transcend and become a kind of civilization that's different than us? I don't know, but it's fun to think about. And you can imagine any other place that, you know, maybe there are somewhere in a far distant star, a race of ascetic monks that, you know, are far better meditators than we ever would be, and have learned how to manipulate space-time mentally. You know, I mean, again, there are these clues in human history and culture that such abilities exist. You know, there's been lots of research that some people believe is sufficient to prove the case, whether mainstream science wants to believe it or not. You know, I can look at the data and go, if this were a paper about cancer, then I would say it's true, because the numbers don't lie. Your interpretation might be wrong. So anyway, I have, you know, I think one of the best movies about it recently was that movie Arrival. And, you know, that basically depicted an alien thought process that saw time as as something that language could use to transcend your vision of reality. So yeah, I have no, I mean, I expect it. It can't be that everybody thinks like humans, you know, because that's like saying humans think like monkeys, or humans think like the reptiles from which we descended. Yeah, there's an evolutionary process back to that, but we don't think the same. And we hope we evolve and become something different. Humans, 10,000 years from now, assuming we don't, you know, descend into anarchy or otherwise, will be very different than us. We are already different than who we were in the 1500s. So, yeah, and that excites me. I mean, all the science fiction I've ever read, which is basically every science fiction book that ever came across my desk I've read, was because I was interested in the aliens in those books and the different ways that the authors depicted a thinking process. Some of the best ones that I liked the most were that the thought process or even came from their biology and their evolution, that shaped what they were and how they thought and their perceptions. So yeah, I hope it is. I hope it's different.
Some people say that the Greys actually see their soul or, I'm sorry, their soul is not united to them, but as a field. So yeah, you know, and if it's true that they just drink smoothies and stuff, then they're not thinking about food all the time that like humans are. And if they want sex, they're not thinking about sex either. So the brains are different.
Well, let me ask one last question. Are we at a point in evolution where the availability of the psionic assets and the telepathy tapes and this access and this conversation on consciousness and what you just said about this evolution, could we, I'm not saying we, be at this nexus point where we are actually becoming a new species that will think differently than 20th century humans, or whatever you want to call it?
What that requires, I mean, yes, I think the potential is there. So what that requires, though, is separation. You know, species evolve best or most quickly when they're separated from the other groups. I mean, Darwin's finches is the perfect example of that. A geographic dislocation, either ocean or mountain ranges, when two groups can no longer intermingle their genes, that allows for one to drive forward or evolve differently than another. I mean, it's just basically, it's because you're, you know, because your environment has changed. Either because of genetic drift or because of the, you know, the environment changes, you need to adapt. But if your environment doesn't change, like, you know, sharks, their environment hasn't changed in several 100 million years, or however long they've been around, and they're apparently the same as they were long ago. They've evolved to a point of near perfection. They don't need to change. Yeah, what was that? Sorry, what was the question again? I'm kind of like.
But our cultural environment is changing, especially with disclosure. So we may be at the cutting edge of a human evolution based on all these external assets that we are now aware of, like the telepathy tape, all that. Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, others have pointed this out, that because humans adapt their environment to their needs, they don't, and because we don't, and please don't take me wrong, I'm not advocating eugenics, because we don't cull the herd.
Right.
You know, we accumulate mutations. I mean, I have a mutation that causes cancer. That's why I get all these skin cancers all the time. I mean, it flat out causes it. I would have been dead when I was 32, except for medicine. Mm-hmm. I might have been able to pass my genes on, but that would have been the end of things. And so, I think civilization and culture slows down evolution. Doesn't stop it, but you've still got the weight of the non-changed contributing their genes to the gene pool. So it's only via separation that you will accomplish this. And so that's one great reason why getting off this planet and getting to other places so that we can isolate and adapt, so, great if suddenly we had starships and we could get groups of people who were like all of one mind about something to go somewhere else, 10,000 years from now, come back, you'd probably be very different. But, we're also adapting technology to ourselves. So, very soon, one or more of these ideas that I'm talking about changing brain, et cetera, or Elon Musk's Neuralink company or other things are going to be used. And, I frankly, even with AI today, I use AI for everything. If I could incorporate it somehow into my brain, I would be more an appendage to the AI than the AI is an appendage to me. If I could use it as my memory, because, who are you? You are your memory and the memories that shaped you. But you can't remember everything that happened 15 years ago. I can barely remember what it is that I did yesterday. But if I could have that at my beck and call and part of my memory system where the neurons could be interlaced into that structure, who am I then? I now have that, even with AI today, have vastly different capabilities. And the stuff that I use it for is just like, wow, what a relief. I don't have to have this giant, I edit papers with it. I write papers with it. I use it for ideation of ideas. Ideation of ideas, is that redundant?
Ideation.
So, and that's in just 60 years. When I was 16, I remember going to one of the first computer labs in Connecticut. It was a field trip from my school. And I typed into the computer that here's a computer. And, I typed in, I said, who was George Washington? Return, error. And so, and so I've used it, but it's like yesterday's computers were like abacuses compared to what we're doing today. And it doesn't mean that AI is conscious. And I don't think that AI is going to be conscious. I think it could replicate consciousness. We're already past the point of can it mimic a human? Yes, is the short answer to that. And look at how fast it's advancing. And give us another 100 or whatever years, we are going to be merging with our machines. And then you're going to have a fight. You're going to have a fight with those people who think it's horrific and unethical and inappropriate and, that we should ever do it. And then there will be those who are going to do it. You have people already today who are fighting genetics. And the use of genetics to modify human. There's a prohibition, of course, worldwide against it. But who's to say it's not? I'm not saying that I know that it's happening, but who's to say that it's not happening somewhere?
Right.
Or that there won't be a group that says, I don't care what you all say, I'm going to do this. We're gonna create a nation state in the middle of the Pacific. We're going to put a bunch of barges there. We're now the nation of utopia. And we think it's okay to do this. Absent a naval flotilla showing up and sinking them, they could do whatever they wanted.
And who's to say we haven't already done that and the aliens are our CRISPR experiences coming back to us through time? Who knows, right? There's all these different.
Yeah. People often say that. I know one of your questions was, about genetic intervention with humans. I don't, first of all, I don't think you have to. You know, we've evolved dogs faster than we have cats because dogs have a particular transposable set of transposable elements that allows their genomes to be more plastic than cats. But we've evolved them from wolves into, you know, such a range of capabilities, all just by choice. We are going to breed this thing with that. So, you know, if you were a super species, you don't need to genetically intervene. You just need to make sure that the right groups survive and the right matings occur. You know, maybe you can do something, but that level of intervention is you don't just like splice in a gene, you know, because there's so many interconnected relationships in genes that it's just we're not there yet. Maybe somebody is. I mean, I always use the example of the, you know, where is the gene for nest building in birds? There's no gene. It's an instinct, but the instinct is revealed over development of the bird from the egg to the brain structure that forms because of the epigenetic shapes and changes that occur in the DNA of the bird as the program unfolds through development. The genes change, the chromosomes change over time. You need to understand that. If you say, I want this to happen, you need to be able to trace this that happens back through all of the cell types that generate that meta trait. I call them metagenes, that metagene trait, so that you understand you're accomplishing the goal and not causing a problem. And maybe, you know, I think we're going to be there in far shorter order than I would have believed 5 years ago because of the large language models and AI, which tells me that there is a way to do it if you are sufficiently advanced and you would know what to do. That doesn't mean it's happened, but it also tells you that people who are looking to find some genetic evidence of hybrids, it's a lost cause. The changes would be so subtle as to be lost in the noise, I think. Now, of course, if reptilians are real, then obviously you're going to see something very different. But I mean, the they walk amongst us crowd doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that detecting them by whatever technologies we have today would be fruitless. But we've evolved them from wolves into, you know, such a range of capabilities, all just by choice. We are going to breed this thing with that. So, you know, if you were a super species, you don't need to genetically intervene. You just need to make sure that the right groups survive and the right matings occur. You know, maybe you can do something, but that level of intervention is you don't just like splice in a gene, you know, because there's so many interconnected relationships in genes that it's just we're not there yet. Maybe somebody is. But I mean, I always use the example of the, you know, where is the gene for nest building in birds? There's no gene. It's an instinct, but the instinct is revealed over development of the bird from the egg to the brain structure that forms because of the epigenetic shapes and changes that occur in the DNA of the bird as the program unfolds through development. The genes change, the chromosomes change over time. You need to understand that. If you say, I want this to happen, you need to be able to trace this that happens back through all of the cell types that generate that meta trait. I call them metagenes, that metagene trait, so that you understand you're accomplishing the goal and not causing a problem. And maybe, I think we're going to be there in far shorter order than I would have believed 5 years ago because of the large language models and AI, which tells me that there is a way to do it if you are sufficiently advanced and you would know what to do. That doesn't mean it's happened, but it also tells you that people who are looking to find some genetic evidence of hybrids, it's a lost cause. The changes would be so subtle as to be lost in the noise, I think. Now, of course, if reptilians are real, then obviously you're going to see something very different. But I mean, the they walk amongst us crowd doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that detecting them by whatever technologies we have today would be fruitless.
Yeah. Our eyes are only seeing a part of reality. So all of these discussions are so fascinating. We have Garry Nolan as one of the premier worldwide investigators that's advocating for us to really come together, the major institutions, governments, people in general, to come and apply some rigorous science, curiosity, open-mindedness to our future. If you want to check out Garry Nolan, you can find out his incredible organization at the Soul Foundation. You can also find amazing decades worth of interviews from Alan Steinfeld on New Realities YouTube. It's incredible. I love that you're interested in consciousness, Garry, because that really, for me, is something that's even higher than physics. And so when we understand it, we reap the benefits from this. Mm-hmm. So thank you for bringing that into it, because it really messes things up in terms of the, of the simplicity of conversations and things. We have a impossible coaching this year that is taking consciousness into an applied research place in your lives. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about ETs, we're talking about our lives, we're talking about genetics, we're talking about applying what we know from science into your life. Is your phone ringing off the hook right now?
No,
I don't want to predict, because that,
right.
What a timeline might be, but so, back in 2015, I was involved with so let's call it a core group of people, scientists, who were working on all that, the usual names would come up: Jacques, Cal, Eric, et cetera. These people who are, Jay Stratton, people who were behind the scenes doing all of this stuff, and stuff that was secret then, like, we'll go say, we'll talk about this. Suddenly it started coming out. So what I knew in, let's say, 2013, 2014, didn't really kind of come out until 2018. So that's a 5-year lapse. And then suddenly the secrets that I knew, and the time interval between me knowing that secret and then everybody suddenly knowing about it, shortened. And so that tells me, I mean, literally every day, everything is changing.
Right.
And so, people, the people on Twitter who say, "Oh, nothing's ever changed," no, oh, shut. There's no evidence. There's lots of evidence. You just haven't taken the time to look at it. Yeah. So shut up. It's like if you don't think that there has been a change, in either again, I went to this party of my 90-year-old mentor with a bunch of scientists at, and I got cornered by everybody wanting to know about, what does Garry know about aliens?
Right.
Less than you think, but more,
more than you know. More than you know.
And, but I never thought of myself in my life as an activist. And I'm seen as being an activist. Or that I needed to be the leader of a movement or anything like that. The only thing that drives me is the anger, but how dare you not allow me to ask the question? And Avi Loeb has the same kind of thing. It's like, you're a scientist. You're not supposed to talk about ideas that way. you're a priest. You're not a scientist. Stop it. If you want to be a priest, or a nun, there's the convent, head over. If you want to believe, in dogma. And so if anything has motivated me into this, it has been that righteous indignation that questions should be asked. But again, I got that from my mentors, and I got that from ideas that I had as a scientist, where somebody said, oh, that won't work. I said, well, okay, you're wrong. Let me prove you wrong.
Right.
And you know what came out of that? All the retroviral technology that does gene therapy, that was me. I came up with that, right? All retroviral technology. I was told by a Nobel Prize winner that it wouldn't work.
Right.
Not my boss, the Nobel Prize winner, when I showed him and another colleague the idea, this guy Warren Pear, they're like, oh wow, let's do it. So, it's like, I think that's what I'm trying to inculcate in people is the right to ask the question and the right to do it your own way to the audience.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Unlimited Show. In the meantime, stay tuned for more.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Wow, that was so amazing. Thinking back to all the stuff he talked about. I was really excited about the consciousness and the Psionics. Psionics. Why I was like not thinking. Yeah, so
Psionics is a good word though.
Right. We're going to need it for a lot of the new technologies coming out. But he talked about ultrasonic manipulation. He's like, we can do that so it doesn't hurt the brain now. I don't know if I try it because it sounds a little experimental. But
you know what I liked about the conversation is that he wasn't confined to one little set of ideals, that he did cover a lot of ground, and we got to know him. I felt like I got to know him more as a bigger mind than people asking just specific questions about UAPs or disclosure. It's like he was expressing more of his passion, about knowledge and what his interests were. And your question about what really excites you was really good, so I think
and when he was talking about I loved how he talked. I agree. I loved how he talked about evolution. He talked about DNA. He talked about AI. He talked about all of the main concepts that are huge right now. And he also talked about, when he was talking about the materials science, and he was talking about also, this idea that, I think there's going to be massive, when we look at these new materials from Velcro all the way to plasma things to electromagnetic things, it's all going to open up all these businesses, all these medical devices, all these all this stuff. And what he said when he talked about the psionics were the three things. So I want to break it down. So he said, number one, he said drugs as heavy as tryptophans, like LSD or whatever. So I would think that they can do much more designer type things that can get people more specifically in a more specific brainwave in order to make contact with other dimensions. But I think to some extent, at least, that probably relaxes people. The second thing he said was electromagnetic stimulation. So it's like wearing, and we've done this before in contact protocols, where we've put the 7.83 devices on our head, but what frequency that is. And you can also, with this device, you can actually braid two different things together, like to do lucid dreaming. So we could get the gamma plus the 7.83. So, but he also talked about, reality the universe doesn't exist until it's observable. So we go back, and what he said was, ETs have a way. I don't know if he said this, but Jack said it, Jack Valet said it, is that basically they can take a space in a room and create whatever they want with their consciousness.
Right. I wrote that down. To them, consciousness is negotiable.
Yes,
And
reality is negotiable. So
and it's not to us because we have yet to develop that capacity. I think we have the potential, but no one's told us how to use consciousness. And in my last, I just gave a lecture to Ubiquity University, Jim Garrison, and all those people that I was saying, consciousness is an app. It's an application. How are you going to direct it? Everybody thinks consciousness is just one thing. Oh, yeah, we're conscious. But I say it's like that definition is like having an old telephone attached to the wall with a wire. And I'm coming along and saying, no, my telephone can do so much more. I can watch movies. I can make reservations. And that would be inconceivable to someone who thought, well, a telephone only does one thing. So we're stuck in that mindset where consciousness is just one thing. It's this awareness. So what I'm bringing into the conversation is it's an application where we could send and receive thoughts. We could go into people's dreams. We can fabricate realities for ourselves and others. It's actually the unlimited tool of potential. All we have to do is imagine, and we're still stuck in boxes of what we think consciousness is. As we redefine it in terms of its potential, that may seem outrageous, then we will actually be able to use it in those ways, and like the ETs or whoever they are.
I think you're right, because that imagination, that is part and parcel of consciousness. And that's why I think we get so screwed up these days, is because our imagination is we don't have an interesting relationship with it quite yet,
well, because we've been dumbed down. By the time you're 5 years old, you're learning to
trustworthy, we feel.
Well, you have an incredible imagination. You're a great artist and you're so excited. So you have more potential to access that than most people. That's why
when you think about it, everything is imagination. Like
of
nothing
course.
Is created without the dream.
Everything we see around us comes from the imagination. But imagine if we could manipulate realities in the way that ETs do. Imagine the potential we could have to change our lives.
And I think we do. I think that as we grow in our evolution, you essentially go high, you move higher frequency. You may die certain times and whatever, like on this journey, you may do it while you're alive. I don't know, but like basically, eventually they say when you're dead, you can think something and it just appears in front of you. So
but I don't think you have to be dead to do that.
Exactly,
I think
exactly. And that's what we know to be true in terms of living the realities that we want to live and creating the realities that we want to live into. And I think when he said, he's like, it could be that these beings could manipulate space-time mentally. Okay, let that sink in.
We could do that.
It's exciting.
If we understood that space-time was a fabrication of the mind to begin with, which it is. It doesn't exist. As Donald Hoffman, he referred to Donald Hoffman. Space-time, I think Einstein even said that, are not absolutes. They're rules or confinements by which we have defined our own mind and reality, but they don't really exist, according to some people. But we're so brainwashed to think in space-time that we can't even see how to get around it to manipulate it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not that it's not that we don't think it exists. It's that we don't think it's manipulable. We don't think it's negotiable.
It is negotiable.
It is negotiable. Even though distance seems like, oh, that's a far away thing from here to Paris. It's not. And same with time, from here to last year, the day before, or whatever, or many years, right? So fascinating. I'm so glad.
We're trapped, though. I just want to say we're trapped in this mindset that we've actually been brainwashed and socially conditioned to accept. So we don't think, like when I felt like I teleported a couple of months ago, it's like I couldn't even accept that. It was too it was too like, is this possible? Like, so we no longer argue for our limitations, which is what a teacher I had said. Don't argue for your limitations. Let's step outside the box where anything imaginable is possible and unimaginable as well. So, right.
Yeah. And that's why it's really fun to come together with all of you tonight to co-imagine this world together. And that's where it really gets fun.
But that's what's so great about Garry Nolan. He is a scientist who's not limited to the dictates of science. He's not a priest of science. He is an adventurer of possibilities. That's why he discovered retrovirus. He discovered all these things that because he was a free thinker, and he's using this to talk about the UAP thing because no one understands that. And the Soul Foundation, I think, is a progressive organization to start to put some of these new concepts together and say, well, what's really going on here? How do we understand it in a new way, psychologically, sociologically, just intellectually? We need new markers to realize new realities. That's why I called my show New Realities for all these years.
Yeah, I agree with you. This Garry Nolan is incredibly open-minded to the point of being like, that's actually what we need to do, because you're right. He said that was so interesting. He's like, yeah, Nobel Prize winning scientist told me what I was doing was never going to work. And here he is inventing an entire realm. And that's the thing. He's like, what happened to the play? He's like, what happened to the play? What happened to the play? And in invention, that's like the tinkerer, like to put two things that don't go together. And he actually called for a Manhattan level budget. He's like, I don't know if this should be government or university or private. Like, it would be cool if someday some of that stuff was international, open source.
Well, you're doing that, Zenka. LightNet is sort of a kind of citizen science of consciousness.
And let's whatever we can, let's put the research out there, because that's what Garry Nolan was saying. He's like, if we don't get scientific about it, nobody can use any research of anyone else's, because it's not even valid. It's not even, no one's replicated. Like, if enough things get replicated 2 or 3 times, or then you can build upon that assumption.
But we also need a new science, but maybe it's not based on replication. I mean, of course, science is, but we need a science that's evolutionary, that is based on other things, So
one of Garry Nolan's main things when he talks about his methodology is the difference between conclusions and hypotheses.
Right.
So he's saying, I think in a sense, we're rolling back some of our conclusions that we've made about science. And he's saying that when you observe something, there might have to be new science to explain that thing that we're observing. And what I like about him is, though he's very open-minded, he's also very rigorous and grounded, so that he's got the both things going on for himself. And I also like that he put Peter in the Soul Foundation. He's like, oh yeah, I'm the scientist, genetics, biology, everything. But Peter's looking at the philosophy of it, the psychology, the philosophy, all those other questions. So it's cool, but he was drumming up, at the Soul Foundation, all he was talking about, they were just trying to get the proof together to be taken seriously by academia and the government. And now we're going to be past all that.
What do you mean by proof? Like, what proof?
It was like, Avi Loeb and all those guys are like having to redo what we've done already militarily to verify, are there ships, are there not? It's like the triangulation of all the cameras, like they want to get triangulation data. Avi is working on it with all his super cameras and stuff, just to prove that the phenomenon exists. But it's like, I can't wait till we're actually past that. and have research funding to research the consciousness of ETs, for example, which Adam's always saying that that's really the most interesting thing. Because one of the things Garry talked about, he's like, the way you think is a direct product of your environment, of your planet.
Exactly. We need to get out of the box. That's why we need think tanks like me and you, where we can stimulate each other's thoughts, that we can start to think new ideas. Actually, Avila is going to be on a show I'm doing with Neil called The Real Disclosure. Maybe you want to come on and talk to Avi about some of these ideas, because
I love Avi because he in one fell swoop took the Cambridge universities, Yale universities, all those guys down the thing, like, hey, wait a minute, we're scientists, let's be curious.
This is what John Mack did at Harvard as well, and he almost lost his job for that.
Yeah,
so,
he did too.
But it goes back to what Thomas Kuhn said, theories of scientific revolution, that science progresses one funeral at a time. I mean, not anymore with scientists like Garry Nolan. So
yeah, Garry and Avi legitimized it, and Mac. Those three are heroes.
That's right. They are heroes, because then you get someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson who said, no, it's impossible. Those Tic Tacs must have been artifacts of the radar. And flavor, and they saw it with their own eyes. And someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson said, no, it's impossible. It's impossible for him because he can't accept the fact that maybe there's more to reality than what he's been taught as a scientist. So scientists get very attached to their ideas, which is what Avi Loeb came up against when he said, you know what, this may actually be an extraterrestrial craft. So we have to encourage free thinking scientists to start to formulate new categories of understanding. This is what Garry Nolan's doing, and other people, Hal Puthoff, and lots of people like that are inputting new possibilities. And that's why I love talking to you, doing interviews with these people, these cutting edge interviews, because everyone needs to get over their old assumptions. They're brainwashing. Terence McKenna said, culture is not your friend because it'll make you think just like everyone else. So we have to step outside the box. And I'm happy we did this interview, because it just shows a thinking person who's considering so much more possibility and being vulnerable about it. That's what I really loved about all this,
Yeah, and just a little thing, even though disclosure is out, there's still a lot of people, like, I think we as a community are going to want to rush to start to talk about our normal, with our normal friends, all this like astral travel and all this craft and this and plasma. Like, I think we can take a page from Garry's book. And he was very eloquent in that he was always never assuming that something that's not written in the dictionary is going to be considered agreed upon. So he says, he cages everything. That my hypothesis is this. My hypothesis is that there is crafts, then they work like this. And that allows people that are not in your belief agreement or believing what you believe to go like, okay, what's my hypothesis? Instead of saying, I know, and I know because I have better information and better contacts and better this and better that. And so my mom told me, she's like, you and your friends act like I should know this stuff, and you're shaming me for not knowing it, and you're also acting like it's true when I don't know that it's true. And so this is, as all this stuff is coming out, we can just say, my understanding is this. And until we prove these
things.
Things.
No one knows it's true, but we have to at least take the step in the direction that it should be considered. If you shut it off, then you shut off all the possibilities that those hypotheses can lead to, and then you get stuck in a little box that most people are stuck in. Their only view on the world is their television set, and they don't see anything outside that box. So we're trying to push the envelope of what's possible. Your levitation labs, your dream labs, your teleportation theory, all this is pushing for what has been proven to be possible, maybe not repeatable, but possible. Levitation, right? It's just
if we got 100 people, it's pretty repeatable.
exactly. But can we control it? I mean, that's the thing we need, but that's where we need to.
It's the beginning of our mind accustoming ourselves
Right.
to what reality
That's
we're
we
choosing,
need
because
the neural
is
nets.
possible. Yeah, anything's
You know,
possible.
yes, it's anything's possible. We are in our own way based on our false belief systems that's stopping those new neural nets of understanding and make that connection to explore these new realities. So we just need to keep pushing the envelope.
Yes, yes. This interview, thank you, Alan, too, for being on, because with this interview, because you have done so much research. And I remember when we set this up, you were like, Garry Nolan knows about this part of your brain
Yes,
is the
yes,
assemblage point of
yes.
how you perceive your reality. And Garry talked about how unless an ET were to rearrange your brain, you wouldn't be able to remember how to have these abilities, or your brain would change. Like, I'm really interested in the harmonics of the brain. I'm interested in muscle memory of abilities like levitation or spoon bending. All this stuff is such a cool frontier for us to do more interviews about.
This is what was kept secret in the mystery schools because people were so afraid of what their own minds could do, and it was kept suppressed. But now we're bringing it out into the open. You're creating a mystery school that's available for everyone, because I saw people in your group hold a spoon and bend it with I saw that happen. And I thought, well, because I saw Uri Geller do it, but I thought maybe only Uri Geller could do it. But these people off the street basically were doing the remarkable. Ordinary people doing the extraordinary. And so
yeah, that's why I think it's consciousness. I don't think there's special DNA, this, that, whatever. I love that we have all of the DNA from 4 billion years, or we have all the grandmothers that ever were in our computer here.
right.
It's credible, but
yeah. So much is, but we're at the forefront. I mean, and what the telepathy tapes have shown is that once we get out of our own way with this huge field that's available to anyone with consciousness, it's just that these non-speaking autistic children are, they have more available to them than their personality.
Because Nolan said, he's like, you only get to perceive what you are needing to perceive in order to evolve, right? So he's like, in order to reproduce and exist, you're not going to get special, perception beyond that. And yet these autistic children have perception beyond what normal people have. So it's interesting, because this means we're about to push through this evolutionary consciousness, the shift in consciousness, a leap. It's so exciting, for all those people. We just did an interview thanks to Sandy Sedgbeer of the No Bullshit, No BS Spiritual Book Club. So she recommended Susie Miller, and Susie Miller has interviewed she's worked with autistic children her whole life, and she's had this incredible firsthand experiences, just like Garry. He's like, I don't have to believe my own experience because I was in my own experience,
Right.
Like,
right.
yes, my life was different because, as a scientist, because I had this experience, because it's still tinkering in his mind.
So, it seems like, Zenka, we are at the forefront of a new knowledge, a new paradigm of who human beings are. It's like the beginning of a revolution here that is seeping down from free thinkers like Garry Nolan and Diana Powell and Grant Cameron and some amazing people coming forward with new considerations. This is really what we're looking at. And it's like the old framework is just breaking down. Like Donald Hoffman, space and time are not true. They're not facts. They're frameworks in which we have framed reality, but maybe they're not real. Maybe they're just fabrications of the mind as well. So it's an unknown territory we are moving into. And I think that is why we both enjoy Garry Nolan, because he's not afraid to consider the impossible and the improbable, the unlikely. And, Richard Feynman, I think, said, one of the greatest things you can say in science when you see something unusual is, that's funny, and then that leads to further exploration. It's not like, the results of your experiment. You don't want to know the results until they unfold, and you could develop new theories about the way things are. So we think we're so sophisticated, but I think we're really in an infancy that is going to be birthing whole new realities around us all the time. So
Yeah,
is there
I
any?
just see that. I love your mind, Alan. I love
Oh,
how you think, because
I
you
just,
are so expansive. You're not scared of going out more and out more and out more. When I found out today that Google, or that they had announced, oh my gosh, they had announced an AI that was faster than the one 2 months ago, DeepSeek, and it's like art, it's like, wow, everything is self-referentiating itself. So it's very interesting to allow ideas to expand the way you're thinking. And I love the way you are, Alan, because you're always expanding that. And I see, when you were talking, I saw this picture of like a guy in a room and then you just open the door and there was so much more than we ever dreamed. And I think we're in that right now. So
that's why I like talking to you, because we can feed off each other and inspire each other to break out of whatever box we may have been limited in. And that's why I think tanks are important, because we getting a collection of people who are free thinkers to explore new consideration to all our old assumptions maybe aren't real truths that we can then go beyond. And that's why I think it's a revolution in consciousness that's happening here. Federico Fergini, do you know who he is? You should look at me.
Yes.
Another brilliant mind.
Nonstop.
He stepped out of the box. I mean, there's Bernard Kastrup is another one. There's some really genius thinkers out there that are inspirational. I think Donald Hoffman, although I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but at least he's thinking about reality different. Bruce Lipton, of course, another. So
if consciousness is something we have to understand in order to understand ETs and reality and everything else, then I'm glad that we're on the hunt to find some of the people that are really putting the theories together as they grow. And if you're interested in utilizing this kind of thinking in your own life, if you're ready to do what you're here to do what you've always dreamed to do, then let's use consciousness to get you there. And
that's right. Yes. I'm putting together a couple of events coming up, but can I show you?
Yes. Talk about them now.
One is a Sedona Making Contact retreat at the end of this, let me see, the end of April, with a woman named Hope Fitzgerald. And let me just share my screen here. Hope Fitzgerald, she invented the infinity wave. And let me see, here we go. Okay, here. This is Hope, and we're doing a Making Contact retreat. So anyone who is watching this can come and be part of our retreat. Go to spreadinfinitehope.com/Sedona. We're going to go out into the desert after learning to create a kind of wave of infinity with our own consciousness and send that beam out. Maybe it's a way psionics actually works, because you want to connect with these beings and call them in. So spreadinfinitehope.com/Sedona. I think Coffee is actually signed up to do this one,
Great.
And And there's hope and there's me. I think that's going to be
She was
great.
in the remote viewing. And remember when she did the channeling, everyone got the target. It was like
Oh, yes, that's right. She was
powerful.
part of that.
Yeah.
We need to pull up some of those. Those were miracles we did with some of those
Yeah.
remote viewing groups. I mean, it's great. And then I want to invite you, Zenka, to this other event that I'm doing with Neil Gar. It is the Real Disclosure, it's called. Let me see if I can find that. And the Real Disclosure is
And then we also have this Sedona Ascension Retreat. That's
oh, right. Let's put that up, the Sedona Ascension Retreat. But I want to show you this one thing here. This is the Real Disclosure Conference. 3 days. This is a Tuesday schedule. I want to invite you on. We have Avi Lowe. This is Pacific time, 1 p.m. We have Karen Billar. We have JJ and Desiree. We have Riz Verk, Geraldine Orozco. But maybe you could join me for the 1 o'clock interview with Avi Loeb, okay?
Okay, that sounds great.
And then you can also come on the panel where we can discuss. So 3 days, March 10th is going to be talking about the government disclosures. Michael Schratt, Brant Cameron, Rebecca Hardcastle, Tara, Richard Doty I have on there. March 11th is more about the worldviews and belief systems that lock people in. And Wednesday, March 12th, it's going to be experiencers. So people can join that at portaltoascension.org and go to events. And then me and you are connecting to this other event happening in Sedona.
Yeah, the Sedona Ascension Retreat.
Which
10th year anniversary. So awesome.
Yes. Oh, it's going to look at this lineup here.
Robert Edward Grant.
You know Sarah Brexman Cosme?
No.
Oh, you should interview her. She brings people back to their past lives as a galactic citizen. He's
Vivian,
incredible.
Mark, Adam,
Daryl Anka, this woman, Kristen Hoffman. We got to invite her to your
amazing.
party. She is an incredible singer. This is a real all-star cast.
So SedonaAscensionRetreats.com.
So there's a lot coming up. If this interview with Garry Nolan has stimulated you, there's Susan Shastner.
This is going to be Sunday. This is for LightNet members. We have our membership now. It's 144 a year, 14 a month, and basically it's spoon bending, it's coaching, it's all sorts of events, backstage things. And one of the events that's going to be this Sunday at 4 o'clock Pacific is Do It Differently. And Susan Schatzer is one of those people that she will rug pull your life. If you are up against a block, or you can't solve it, something's between you and your dreams, she'll just yank that thing out and you're like, oh, new life. It's cool to see her. And we're going to broadcast live on your network on New Realities. But we are going to if you want to work with her, become a member at ourlightnet.org, because it's life-changing. She took away my seasickness. I'm not seasick anymore. I can probably go on the cruise with you next time. You're muted, Alan. But anyway, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to Garry Nolan and the other giants out there that are standing tall with their curiosity and researching consciousness like we are. So thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks, Alan.
Zenka, thank you. Should I just check this chat to see if anybody's interested in asking anything on the chat?
Yes.
Let me see. I have to pull. Have you been checking the chat at all?
No, because the way we had the live stream, it was.
Let me just check the chat.
We had a loop in the live stream too, but.
Let me just check the chat. I don't see any new questions. Cool. Aaron Apke will be
backstage. I hope.
All right. Well, Annie, I think we covered a lot today, and thank you so much for asking me to be part of this. It was an honor, because he is one of the heroes. He's one of the leaders. He's one of those that not afraid to step out in front. I mean, he opened the whole David Grush exposure that would come at the Salt Talks, where he was asked, do you believe ETs are real? He said, not only are they real, but they're here, And that opened a whole doorway, Garry Nolan, to a new territory in disclosure. So he's one of the people that are making this happen. And
It really is.
we need truth. If we're really going to understand what consciousness is, we need to have all the evidence, all the facts on the table.
And we need citizen scientists, and LightNet is, we're excited about the coaching, and we're also excited to study 100 spin benders, 100 levitators. This year is where we're going to put all the data in the software and the think tank that is, public knowledge. This is for all of you guys, because if you have a spoon and you have a brain, you have consciousness, and we can make harmonics in our brain and do really cool stuff, and hopefully travel intergalactically soon, because that's going to be really fun.
Thank you. Let's talk soon, Zenka.
Okay,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
See you in Sedona soon. Come down.
Yes, definitely. Okay.
Okay, bye.